I used to think wealth would feel louder when it arrived. I thought it would announce itself. I thought there would be some clear dividing line between the life where you were still trying to make everything work and the life where money had finally started obeying you. Maybe a great investment, maybe a brilliant business decision, maybe a year so obviously different from all the others, that even while living it you could say to yourself, this is it. This is the turn. That is not how it happened. And after watching my own life and the lives of thousands of other people, I have come to believe that one of the biggest reasons ordinary people stay financially tired is that they are waiting for wealth to arrive in a form dramatic enough to respect. Real wealth, at least in ordinary lives, usually enters much more quietly than that. It comes in through subtraction. It comes in through fewer things to manage, fewer impulses to obey, fewer habits draining your attention, fewer monthly obligations demanding fresh labor just to preserve the shape of your life. That is the sentence most people do not want to hear. They want wealth to arrive through more income, more activity, more intelligence, more sophistication, more products, more accounts, more opportunities, more complexity. The truth, more often than people want to admit, is that many people do not get rich because they never learned how to need less without feeling smaller. That is the real difficulty. When I was younger, I loved the idea of success more than I understood the mechanics of it. I knew how to admire a rising number. I knew how to admire a big office, a handsome title, a full calendar, and the particular kind of busyness that makes a person look as though he must be important. I understood growth as expansion, more commitments, more possessions, more movement, more evidence that life was enlarging. That is a very normal misunderstanding. It is also a very expensive one, because once you begin organizing your life around the display of progress, you start spending money not to improve your future, but to maintain the emotional experience of having arrived. That is how people can earn good money and still feel poor. They do not always become reckless in some obvious way. They simply allow life to grow branches faster than the trunk can bear them. A few more accounts, a few more purchases, a few more subscriptions, a few more conveniences, a few more social habits that cost money to sustain, a slightly nicer wardrobe, a slightly more expensive flat, a slightly more upgraded idea of what a normal week should look like. Nothing theatrical, nothing you would confess to a judge as the obvious crime, and identity spending that the money comes in, goes out, and leaves behind far less freedom than the income level should have been capable of producing. That is the trap I see all over modern life. People are not only overspending, they are over-managing, they are over-choosing, they are overreacting. They are carrying too many small systems that each promise optimization and together create. This matters because tired people make expensive decisions. Every decision costs something, not always money, often attention, and attention is one of the most underpriced assets in ordinary financial life. A man who spends his mornings deciding what to wear, which app to check, which account still qualifies for which rate, which payment is due, which opportunity he might be missing, which subscription he forgot to cancel, which impulse purchase he might as well allow because the week was hard, is not just spending money in the wrong places. He is spending judgment in the wrong places. That is a deeper loss, because judgment is what protects money long before money is large enough to protect you. This is why I have always respected simplicity more than cleverness in personal finance. Cleverness is overrated. Clever people love multiplying systems. They love feeling engaged. They love managing complexity, because complexity lets them feel active and intelligent. The problem is that financial life does not reward activity in the way ego hopes it will. What financial life rewards over long stretches is clarity. Clarity about where the money goes. Clarity about what is enough. Clarity about what you actually use. Clarity about the difference between a tool and a toy, between a life-serving purchase and an identity, serving one between a real opportunity and mere noise. Minimalism, as I came to understand it, has very little to do with owning almost nothing. It has almost everything to do with refusing to let noise become your cost structure. That is the line I want to stay on, because the people who end up quietly wealthier than the rest are not always those who earn the most in every year. Very often they are the ones who learned how to let less friction stand between income and ownership, They learned how to keep the gap alive. That gap is everything. The gap between what comes in and what leaks out. The gap between the present self and the future self. The gap between the life your money could have been building and the life it is currently being used to decorate. If that gap survives, wealth has a chance. If the gap closes, almost nothing else matters. You can earn far more than your parents ever earned and still end up exhausted, if your life keeps rising fast enough to consume the difference. That is what people mean when they talk about lifestyle creep. Though I have always thought the phrase was too gentle. It sounds like weather, like something that happened to you while you were busy being responsible. In truth, it is a quiet form of surrender. The raise arrives, and before your future even gets a vote, the present self recruits the money into a new version of normal. A nicer place, nicer dinners, nicer habits, nicer little stories about what a person at your level should now be doing. Then, 6 months later, the higher salary feels ordinary and the freedom it could have created is gone. This is why some of the most powerful wealth building decisions look almost embarrassingly dull from the outside. They are not stories, they are friction controls. One less account, one fewer decision in the morning, one automatic investment, one deleted shopping app, one more pause between desire and payment, one more year of living as though the raise never quite arrived. That does not sound like the script of a triumphant life. That is precisely why it works. The public is drawn toward financial drama because drama flatters ambition. It lets a person imagine that wealth belongs to those who are somehow bigger, bolder, more dynamic, more exciting than everyone else. The truth is often humbler. Wealth in ordinary life is frequently built by the person who can make fewer stupid decisions for longer than the crowd can. That is not a glamorous edge. It is a real one. Take accounts. This sounds trivial until you look closely at what complexity does to the mind. A person opens one account for spending, one for the switching bonus, one for the savings rate, one for the reward card, one for the cashback system, one more for this bank's promo. Another because some personal finance channel said it was smart to maximize every corner of the system. At first, this feels intelligent. The person is not spending, after all. He is optimizing, but optimization can become its own expensive hobby. Every extra account comes with rules, minimums, conditions, things to remember, things to monitor, little tasks that quietly occupy the same mind that was supposed to be studying opportunity, building skill, or simply thinking clearly enough to make better long-run decisions. There are moments in life when complexity is justified by the size of the prize. Most of the time in ordinary personal finance, complexity is just mental overhead pretending to be intelligence. I have seen the same principle in investing for decades. People think better results must come from doing more. More positions, more ideas, more forecasts, more reaction, more trading, more opinions, more urgent little adjustments, because doing nothing feels like laziness. The actual data is cruel to that fantasy. Most people who constantly intervene are not adding value. They are paying a tax to feel involved. And because finance is one of the few fields where inaction can be a mark of superiority, this drives people crazy. They want to earn the result visibly, so they turn a workable process into a crowded desk of half-useful activity. I have always admired the investor who can ignore 99% of what the world calls opportunity, not because he is closed-minded, because he understands the brutal truth that almost all opportunity is either noise, vanity, or temptation, unless it actually improves the long-run position of the capital. The same is true in personal life. If you say yes to every style shift, every trend, every platform, every impulse, every purchase that offers a quick hit of identity, every friend's suggestion, every little algorithmic invitation to scroll, shop, compare, and react, then you are not living deliberately. You are being lived through. That is the condition most people mistake for normal. They think the fatigue is adulthood. They think the clutter is a sign of life. They think the full calendar is proof of value. They think the full wardrobe is proof of taste. They think the shopping apps are harmless because each purchase alone is small. They think the subscriptions are harmless because each one alone is cheap. They think saying yes is kindness. They think not deciding is flexibility. They think complexity is sophistication. Then they wonder why the account balance never seems to reflect the effort. The answer is that money hates clutter almost as much as the mind does. It gets lost in it. And once money gets lost in a cluttered life, the person begins needing more of it simply to preserve the disorder. That is why I say the first minimalist habit is not about owning fewer things. It is about assigning a clear job to everything that remains. One account for spending, one for reserve, one for investing. Not because this is morally pure, because clarity compounds. The person who can glance at his structure and understand it instantly is much harder to fool than the person whose financial life resembles a desk full of open tabs. The same goes for clothes. And here again, people misunderstand the point. They hear the phrase, wear the same thing, and imagine some rigid aesthetic doctrine, some performance of ascetic seriousness, that is missing the deeper logic entirely. The issue is not style. The issue is decision fatigue and identity maintenance. A person with a wardrobe full of half-right decisions does not just own too many clothes. He owns too many little negotiations with himself. What fits the room? What feels right today? What matches the version of himself he wants to project? What justifies the money already spent? What ought to be worn because otherwise owning it becomes more embarrassing? Multiply that kind of friction across years, and the cost is not only financial, it is attentional. The man who reduces his wardrobe to what he genuinely likes, genuinely uses, and can reach for without ceremony is not becoming smaller. He is refusing to spend morning energy on symbolic theater. Steve Jobs understood this. Many founders do. But the principle is not only for famous men in black turtlenecks, it is for anyone who wants more of his judgment available for things that actually change life. The same is true with objects in general. I have long preferred buying the best version once to buying the mediocre version 3 or 4 times. Not because expensive things are virtuous. They are not. Many expensive things are just status in another costume. But there is a kind of quality that reduces total cost. A good suitcase, a proper pair of shoes, a knife that does not disappoint every evening, a chair you actually sit in, a tool that does the job and survives the years. What matters is not luxury. It is whether the thing earns its place. A cheap item that must be replaced repeatedly is not thrift if the total lifetime cost is higher and the experience is worse. It is short-term relief purchased at long-term irritation. This is one of the great confusions in ordinary spending. People think minimalism means always choosing the cheapest option. That is not wisdom. Wisdom is choosing the option that produces the lowest total cost in money, attention, and disappointment over the relevant span of use. Sometimes that is cheap. Sometimes that is not. The real minimalist question is not what costs less right now. It is what leaves behind less drag over time. That is a much better financial question. Then there is the old life. People carry old versions of themselves the way houses carry unopened boxes in the attic. A season ends and the tools, accounts, follows routines, and little aspirations from that season remain. A wedding phase, a fitness phase, an interior, design phase, a crypto phase, a startup phase, a travel phase, a version of the self that needed those visual cues and little consumption trails to keep feeling coherent. But the season ended. The feeds did not. The desires did not fully disappear either, because the algorithm keeps them warm. That is one reason social media is more expensive than it looks. It does not only sell products, it keeps old identities artificially alive long after they cease to serve the real shape of your life. Minimalism, in that sense, is not merely about decluttering drawers. It is about unfollowing versions of yourself that no longer need to keep spending. When you stop feeding the old self, the current self gets quieter. That quiet matters. People underestimate how much unnecessary spending begins not in the wallet but in the imagination. A person scrolls through lives, aesthetics, products, destinations, rooms, and routines that no longer belong to what he truly wants. He feels a small hunger and mistakes it for aspiration. Often it is only residue. Delete enough residue, and you begin wanting less without force. That is a tremendous financial advantage. Minimalism is strongest when it removes desire at the source instead of merely forcing discipline at the last second. This is why I believe the smartest systems make buying slightly annoying. Most modern commerce is designed to eliminate the pause in which better judgment could intervene. One-click saved card, instant checkout, suggested add on. Buy now, pay later. The whole architecture is built to outrun reflection. If you care about wealth, you need to reverse that architecture. Remove the saved payment details. Delete the shopping apps. Make yourself type the card number. Make the browser, the password, the manual steps stand between impulse and purchase. 30 seconds of friction can save hundreds or thousands of dollars over time because it restores the exact interval in which the mind can ask, do I actually want this, or did I only want the mood? That is all most self-sabotage ever needed to be prevented. A little friction. Modern people treat willpower as though it were the main engine of good behavior. I have never trusted willpower that much. Willpower is real, but it is tired by evening. It weakens under stress. It softens under loneliness. It gets outvoted by identity, hunger, social comparison, fatigue, and the thousand little frictions of being alive. Systems beat willpower because systems decide before the mood arrives. That is why the smartest use of a raise is not to celebrate it with lifestyle, but to divert it before your identity can spend it. Invest before you feel it. That is one of the great underappreciated rules in wealth. Building when income rises, the present self begins negotiating instantly. The better flat, the nicer dinners, the upgraded memberships, the little emotional stories about what this new level now deserves. Cut the negotiation short. Route the majority of the increase toward investing before your nervous system adjusts upward. If you can learn to live like the old salary still mostly defines you, while the new salary is quietly building claims on the future, the gap starts compounding with very little drama. That is how ordinary people become much wealthier than their peers, without looking especially extraordinary in the early years. They simply do not let every new dollar recruit a new monthly dependency. This matters because the future is shaped more by the persistence of the gap than by the glamour of the income. I have seen people on enormous salaries stay anxious because almost every dollar had already been promised to an enlarged version of normal. I have also seen people of much more modest means quietly become secure because they protected the spread between what came in and what their life insisted on consuming. That spread is where freedom grows, not in the number itself, in the retained difference. And once you understand that, time changes too. A great many people waste their most valuable asset while telling themselves they are only being agreeable. They say yes to things they do not choose, meetings that could have been messages, coffees that were not really about connection, favors granted from awkwardness rather than principle, social obligations that eat the exact hours in which the future might have been built. Then they say they are too busy to improve their finances. This is one of the great absurdities of adult life. People spend their time like it is less scarce than money and then wonder why the money never changes. Time is the original capital. Money can be remade, time cannot. That is why I have always believed that saying no is one of the most underrated financial skills in the world. Not rude no, not vain no. Clear no. A person who does not protect his calendar cannot protect his direction. And a person without direction almost always ends up financing other people's priorities while claiming he is too occupied to build his own. This is why I like to treat the calendar the way I treat capital. Every yes must be earned. Not every invitation is a good use of life. Not every obligation is sacred simply because someone else wants it from you. The wealthy person is not only the one with more money, he is often the one who became harder to command without proper reason. That begins with time. Now, clutter, people treat clutter as a housekeeping issue. It is not. It is evidence. It is evidence of buying without remembering, keeping without choosing, postponing without resolving, and living in a way where accumulation outruns intention. Spring cleaning is not enough because life does not refill itself once a year. It refills itself weekly. That is why minimalism must be seasonal, not ceremonial. Every few months the same questions must return. What here still serves? What here is only inertia? What here exists because I forgot to decide? What here is costing space, money, guilt, or attention for no meaningful return? Most people do not need more storage. They need fewer unresolved purchases. They need fewer objects that represent a momentary emotion rather than a durable use. And every time you clear a space honestly, something interesting happens. You become a slightly worse customer. You remember, viscerally, how much of what looked attractive at the moment later became noise. That memory is worth more than many budgeting techniques because it reaches desire before desire becomes a transaction. This brings me back to the deepest thing I learned from minimalism. It did not make me richer because I suddenly earned more. It made me richer because it taught me to stop confusing maintenance with living. Most of the objects, accounts, subscriptions, habits, and identity purchases in a cluttered financial life are not adding proportional joy, security, or utility. They are adding maintenance. And maintenance is expensive. It costs money to pay for. It costs attention to remember. It costs guilt to carry. It costs time to organize. It costs comparison to sustain. It costs mental energy to justify. Once I saw that clearly, my relationship with money changed. I stopped asking only, "Can I afford this?" That is a weak question. The stronger question is, what will this require from me after today? That question turns many attractive purchases ugly, very quickly. It also reveals something wonderful. Needing less does not make life smaller. It often makes life quieter, and quiet is one of the great hidden luxuries of wealth. A quieter closet, a quieter banking structure, a quieter investment process, a quieter calendar, a quieter feed, a quieter relationship to desire. A quieter life leaves more room for thought. More room for thought leaves more room for judgment, and judgment, repeated over years, is what wealth really feeds on. If you want me to say it in the plainest possible way, it is this. Most people are not poor because they earn too little. Many are poor because they carry too much noise between income and freedom. They manage too much, buy too much, react too much, signal too much, delay too much. And because all of this is normal, they do not realize how much of their future is being spent on preserving it. The minimalist habit that matters most is not owning fewer things for the sake of looking pure. It is designing a life in which less is required to keep the machine running. Once less is required, more can remain. Once more remains, more can compound. Once more compounds, freedom starts arriving. That is the order. Not magic, not deprivation, not one clever hack. A quieter system. That is what made me richer. Not only in money, though certainly there too. Richer in time, richer in clarity, richer in room, richer in the strange, calm confidence that comes when your life no longer has to earn quite so hard every month just to maintain the shape of itself. That is what I want for you. Not a tiny house, not a saintly identity, not performative scarcity. I want you to have a life where what you own is truly serving you, where what you earn has a chance to stay, and where the future can finally get its share before the present consumes everything. Because once that starts happening, wealth stops feeling like a fantasy sold to you by louder people. It starts feeling like a quiet consequence of a life designed with enough honesty to let money work. And that is far more powerful than most people realize.